Welcome to this Monday.com tutorial. Today I will be talking about and walking through how you can put together a recurring items to-do list that is its own board that syncs up with your to-do list board. This is used for things like if you have a recurring bill that you need to send to a client. Instead of creating an automation to create a new task each month that you want that reminding you to send the bill out, this will allow you to create a board, and then you can set the time period for when you want that item to get created on another board, and you can set some of the other piece of information who it gets assigned to on whichever timer that you put it on. So start out, this is my to-do list board, and these are just very basic to-dos, not a whole lot of information here. There's the name of the task, the notes, when it's due by, and the person who's assigned to, and then the status of the to-do. So to start, I'm going to go to add a new board, and I'm going to put this as recurring to-do list items. Capital I there, create board. And then I'm going to wipe this clear. I'm going to delete this group for now. And then I'm going to delete this. I'm going to keep the status, but I'm going to hide the column summary. And then from here, I am going to add another date. So there's one date icon here, there's another date icon here. I'm gonna hide this status. So this is the date to do created. So this is the date that the to-do item is going to get created, and then this is the due date on to-do. So this is the to-do date that it's going to be due on when it gets created in the to-do list, and this is the date that the item is going to get created in the to-do list. So this is kind of the behind-the-scenes one, and this is the one that you're going to see on the to-do list. And I could just set those dates. Let's say the due date for the to-do item is going to be the 30th, and then I want it to create a week ahead of time, so I want it to get done by the 23rd. From here, I can rename this to send bill to John Doe. And from here, start adding more columns. So let's go with notes. Oops, not notes, text. You can add a large text box and have that as notes. And this is the kind of notes that you want them to realize about the to-do that needs to get created. So once this is created, let me just rename this to recurring items. I'm going to create one more status. So status, put this as, okay, put a status for now. Starting status. Actually, I don't need this one here at all, now that I think about it. So the status is going to be active, oops, inactive, and active. Again, this is another one of the internals. So this is only if you want this item to keep going out. So every month on this date, then it'll go out if it's active. And I'll show you how to do the automations for that in just 1 second. Put the hides column summary. And then from here, I want to go over to automate. And then when date arrives, so this is where you will pick the date when the date to do created is arrived. And when you can just put it as, sometimes I find that it's a little bit difficult if it's 9 o'clock in the morning. For whatever reason, it doesn't always work. The automation doesn't always work, so I typically just choose another date. So I'm just going to have it 8 o'clock in the morning. Then do this, which is create item in board. You select the board that you want it to go to, so the to-do list, and then create the item. So in here, you're going to want to keep the name the same thing. You're going to want to remove the status, because the status is, you don't want that to show up. You want the status to be the default of whatever your to-do list item is. So if I were to keep that in there, it would show up as active, and it'd create a whole new status in there a status icon for the active status, which doesn't make any sense because this status within this board is only for the to-do items, whether it should go out or not. So I want to look back at the item. So the name, make sure that's correct. And you can add something else here. If you wanted to add like a note saying recurring, this will just show up on the main board, knowing that, letting you know that this is one of the recurrent items. This is not a new item that somebody just created, but that's optional. So I don't typically do that. And then the due date, if you wanted to have this, you put this on the due date on the to do. You select the date there. And then notes. So this you want to keep the same because if you have any additional notes about, so let's say you want to send a bill to John Doe, but the bill has to go through Stripe instead of PayPal, notes like that, you want to make sure that you want to include those notes on the recurring items. And then assign it to a specific person. So this is where you can, so there is some bugs currently at the time of this recording where if you select a person, it doesn't always assign them. That's not a problem. I'm just going to say it's going to be assigned to myself. What you can do is have it so when create an item in the to-do list and then assign person. I'm going to click myself as assignee. And so when a new item gets created, it'll assign me as a person, even though I technically already have it assigned to me in here. It's always good to have kind of a double check that it's set up correctly. So this is kind of the first section where it creates the to-do item. Now you want to make sure that you're pushing the date forward. So this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. And things like monthly items, you can have this, and you can set this up in many different ways. The way I typically do it is I'll have another status saying how frequently you want that recurring item to go through. So either that's a week, a month, 2 weeks, whatever that looks like. I'll create another status for that, and I can show you how to do it in just 1 second. So I will have it as assignee. Choose column from the board, add people. Oh, okay. So this is incorrect. I set this up wrong. That's right. Okay, so there was a bug with this. I'm gonna have to leave that for now. It's gonna have to just go through the person here, because it's not trying to assign the person in this new item. It's trying to assign the person in the current item, which is within this board, which I don't want it to change. This is a recurring item. I don't want it to change at all. So that is a problem, and I forget exactly how I solved that with one of my other clients. Also dive into that a bit more later on. Anyhow, so once I go through the to-do, I want to then push the date. So I want to push the date by some days. Typically, if anything, I'm just going to assume that this board is only going to be monthly recurring things. So I'm going to push the date by 30 days. So push the due date. I want to push I want to push both dates. So the date to do created. I need to rename that by some days. So I'm going to put 30 days, or I suppose I can switch over to month. So 1 month. And then I want to push I want to push the date of the due date on to do by 1 month and set. So basically what this does is once the item is created in your to-do list, it'll then push the dates that you have on your recurring item setup board by 1 month. So it'll push the date that to-do is getting created, it'll push that by 1 month, and it'll push the date that the to-do item is due by when it gets created in the to-do list gets created. And that is good to go here. So so one thing I just forgot to mention, when to-do is created, when to-do date is created, when date to-do created arrives, I need to add a conditional item here. So if, why did that go there? So only if the status is active. So this allows me to turn the automations on and off without having to delete the item. So only when the status is active and the date to do created arrives, then it will fire off this sequence over here. So if I update this automation, I close this out. Now what will happen is that whenever this date arrives, so October 23rd, as soon as the date October 23rd arrives, then it'll create an item called send bill to John Doe on the to-do list board right here, and it will set the due date on the to-do. So this due date right here, it will set that due date as October 30th. Once the item is created in the to-do list, it'll then come back over to this item right here, and it'll push this date by 30 days. So now instead of October 23rd, it's going to be November 23rd before the item gets created again. And the same for this date here. So instead of October 30th that it's due by, it'll now be November 30th that it's due by. And so you always have this sequence that keeps getting pushed forward and forward and forward. And the benefit of having a recurring items setup board over here, instead of just going into the to-do list and creating an automation, because what you can do here is every time period. So if you wanted to set like every month on the 30th, then create an item, you could do this as well. So you can create an item here. So send bill to John Doe. You can set the person it's assigned to and the status and the due date. You have a lot more limitations with this. So like the due date, you can only set one date. You can never have it keep pushing it forward. So if I set this recurrent item to go on the 30th of each month, and I say it'll be due on October 30th, the next time it gets created, it'll always set the due date as October 30th, not the following month. So if we're November and it's November 30th, it'll set the due date to be October 30th, which doesn't make any sense because that's in the past or that could be in the future. And so it just doesn't make any sense. And so there's a lot more limitations here. Plus, also, depending who you have setting up these automations, they may not want to get into the details of how you set up an automation like this for every recurring item. It creates every recurring date, it'll create an item. People don't necessarily want to look at this stuff. So to make it easier, I found that building a board recurring items to-do list is a lot easier because people can just type this in really quick. I don't know, create new invoice for John Deere. I can set the date that I want it to be created on, October 21st. I can set the due date it wants to be created on. I want it to be due on October 23rd. And I'll add a note. This is a cool thing that needs to get done. And you have way more freedom in which you can add special notes. You can even if you wanted to add a whole process for how you finish that task, you can add all of those things in here. Whereas the recurring items, it's a lot more difficult and you don't have nearly as much freedom and flexibility as you would creating a whole board for it. So as I mentioned before, if you want to have specific times for when items get created, like let's say since I've made this automation only every month, so after for every month, it'll create the to-do list. I found another way you can do this is by setting specific dates. So over here, I'm going to say recurring dates, and I'm going to delete these statuses, and I'm going to start it out by saying monthly, every 2 weeks, weekly. So by having a status here, I can now select monthly. And then if I were to go and create a new automation, what I can do is when date arrives, so in this case, when date to do is created, when I want the to do item to be created, let's say that's 8 o'clock in the morning, and the status has to be active, and the status recurring dates has to be monthly. Then I want to create an item in the board. I select the board, I select the item, and I'm making my changes here. So remove the status, keep the notes, set the due date as the due date on the to do, and then person it's assigned to. I'm just gonna put myself in there, and then go back and do the other things, which is pushing the dates. Push date on to do created by 1 month. Actually, I'm gonna just do weeks here. So by 1 week, I'm gonna change the status to weekly. So when due date on to do is created, or when the date arrives for the time that you want your to do item to be created, and only if the status is active, so this recurrent item, you want this to be active, and only if the recurring dates is weekly, so this is how frequently you want this item to be created, then create an item in the to-do list and push the date on the next to-do that you want it to be created by 1 week. And I'm going to push the other date and push due date on the due date on the to-do by 1 week as well. 1 week as well. So I click create. I'll make sure I want to turn this one off because this one is no longer going to be active. It's based on, this new one is now based on the new status I just created, where it says it's however often you want it to be recurring. So this will be weekly. Now, every single week on October 23rd, so since October 23rd is this week, on October 23rd, it'll create an item to send a bill to John Doe in the to-do list, and it will set the due date for that item, so when you want it to be due by October 30th, and it will push this date forward, the to-do created date, forward by 1 week. So now instead of being October 23rd, it'll now be October 30th, and on October 30th, it'll create the item again, and it will set the due date 1 week forward, so November 6th. So it'll constantly be pushing itself forward over and over and over again until this status here gets changed to inactive, or you just delete the item entirely. So this will be just a constant thing that just keeps happening, and you can set up different dates for how frequently you want it to be recurring. And these are all however you want to have this set up. So if you wanted to have it set up every 3 days, you can create a new tab here, every 3 days, and then you go into your automate and you just duplicate this same item and you just change the date. So when the recurring date is weekly, let's go change it to 3 days, every 3 days. You duplicate this whole item, and then you have just change the push date to 3 days, and then 3 days here, and that's it. So now, if this item is every 3 days, you want this item to be created every 3 days, and the status is active, then it'll create the item on October 23rd. It'll push it by 3 days, so now it'll be October 26th before it creates it again, and it'll do the same over here. So instead of October 30th, it will now be November 2nd. And so it'll constantly be pushing itself forward, propelling until you decide to stop it. And there's a lot of other really neat things that you can do with this. But I've just found that having a specific board dedicated to recurring to-do items is really helpful, and it makes it easier for the rest of your team, or whoever you're building this for, to quickly create a new to-do list, or a recurring to-do list, that they don't have to think about what is if this then that. They don't have to go into under the automate section over here. You're creating this for them, and so they only see the kind of the front-facing software where they can just type in a name. They can set when they want it to be created by, and they set when they want it to be due by, adding notes to it, and how often they want it to be recurring. So you have a lot of freedom and flexibility with how you want this to be put together. But I've just found it's way more useful and way more helpful for everybody involved to have a specific board rather than a automation that creates just one item, because it gets really messy and complicated, especially when you start having automations up in like the 60 active automations. One of my clients' boards, I have that where I have 60 active automations and things are just moving around constantly. It can get really complicated and you can lose where those items were. So if you had a automation saying send bill to John Doe, you have 60 of them, it's a little bit more difficult to find that one automation in there. Whereas if you have a board that's dedicated to recurring items, then you can find it a lot more easily, and you don't have to delete it. You can just change it from active to inactive, and you shut it off until you want active again. And so that concludes this video. Please note that when you're testing these things out, it can be a little bit difficult because since this is it'll only create the item when the date arrives. You have to wait until that date arrives in the morning. So even if I were to today's Wednesday, October 20th, even for October 20th, it won't create the item until 7 a.m. that morning. Meaning, if I want to test it out, I have to wait until the following day at that time before it'll actually kick off the automation. So this works, and all of the automations work, but just note that if you want to test it, it's a little bit difficult to test it without having to wait until the following day at that time before it'll get created.